The first thing I noticed when the helicopter appeared over the tree line was my mother's garden. She had spent 3 weekends in September getting it perfect. Symmetrical rows of marigolds along the fence. A bird bath she'd ordered from a catalog and made my brother install. Decorative stones spelling out a word I could never quite read from the kitchen window. And in about 45 seconds, every last bit of it was going to be flattened by 3,000 pounds of rotating steel dropping out of a clear October sky. I had maybe a minute to feel bad about that. Then the radio in my earpiece crackled, and I stopped feeling bad about anything except the operational window. My mother was standing on the back porch with her arms crossed, watching me the way she had watched me for most of my adult life, with that specific combination of love and bewilderment that she had never quite learned to hide. I had just spent 10 minutes asking her to move every lawn chair, the ceramic pot she'd carried back from a trip to Savannah, and her sister Carol's folding table off the grass. I had not explained why. I couldn't explain why. And from where she was standing, her daughter was pacing around the backyard with an earpiece in, clearing furniture off a lawn for reasons that were, as far as she could tell, completely disconnected from anything resembling real work. "Sarah," she called out, "are you going to tell me what this is about? Or are we just rearranging the whole yard for fun?" I looked at her. "Just stay on the porch, Mom. Please." She turned to Carol. Carol shrugged. And then the windows started to rattle. "My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 34 years old. I grew up in Millhaven, Georgia, population 11,000, in a house with a screened-in porch, a mother who made sweet tea from scratch and had opinions about everything, and a brother named Caleb, who fixed trucks for a living and was, by every metric my family used to measure success, doing significantly better than I was. I want to tell you about the day a United States Army Black Hawk helicopter landed in my mother's backyard. But to do that right, I have to tell you about the 11 years that came before it. Because the helicopter only matters if you understand what it landed on. And what it landed on wasn't just my mother's marigolds. It landed on a decade of being the family's quiet disappointment. The one who left and came back changed. The one who worked at a laptop all day and couldn't explain what she was doing. The one who, according to my mother's best understanding of the situation, pushed papers for a living while Caleb built things with his hands and Carol's son went to law school and everyone else in Millhaven had a job you could describe at a dinner table without watching people's eyes glaze over. What it actually landed on was 11 years of classified service, 2 overseas deployments, 1 commendation I can't discuss in detail, and a career spent doing work that was specifically designed to be invisible. Work that only became visible when something went wrong. And on a Saturday afternoon in October, with my mother's marigolds about to become a tactical landing zone, something had gone very, very right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I enlisted at 19, which nobody in my family took well. My mother's reaction was complicated in the specific way that my mother's reactions to things she doesn't understand are always complicated. She didn't yell. She didn't cry, at least not in front of me. What she did was go very quiet for about 3 days, and then she started asking practical questions in a tone of voice that made it clear she had already processed her feelings and moved on to managing the situation, which was her version of acceptance. "Will you have your own room?" she asked. "Probably not at first," I said. She nodded like this confirmed something she had already suspected. My brother Caleb was less restrained. Caleb had the particular confidence of someone who has never wanted to be anywhere other than where he already was, which is a kind of peace I genuinely respect and could never personally access. He looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You know you don't have to do this just to prove something, right?" I wasn't doing it to prove something. I was doing it because I had spent 19 years in a town that felt like it was built for a version of me that didn't exist, and I needed to find out what version actually did. The military wasn't an escape. It was more like a door I'd been standing in front of my whole life, and I finally had enough nerve to open it. My mother drove me to the recruitment office. She didn't say much on the way there. When she pulled into the parking lot, she sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel and then said, "You're going to be careful." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded. I got out of the car. She didn't watch me go in. I didn't look back to check. That was the version of goodbye we gave each other, which was the only version either of us knew how to give. Basic training was not what I expected, which is something I think everyone says about basic training because the gap between what you imagine it will be and what it actually is can't really be closed in advance. You can read about it, talk to people who've done it, watch every documentary ever made about it, and still find yourself standing in a formation at 5 in the morning genuinely surprised by the specific texture of the experience. What I didn't expect was how quickly I found my footing. Not the physical parts. Those were hard, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the structure, the clarity, the way that every hour had a purpose, and every task had a standard, and every decision existed inside a framework that told you exactly what mattered and why. After 19 years of vague social expectations and unspoken family rules, and the ambient pressure of being a girl in a small town who wanted more than she could name, the military's particular brand of explicit expectation felt like relief. I was good at it. Not at the things people might assume. I wasn't the fastest runner or the loudest presence in a room. I was good at the parts that happened in your head. Assessing a situation. Identifying what was missing. Holding multiple variables in the air simultaneously, and working out which one was the load-bearing one. My drill sergeant told me about 6 weeks in that I had good tactical instincts. I had never been told I was good at anything tactical before, and the compliment sat somewhere deep and stayed there. By the time I finished my initial training and moved into my specialty, I had a clearer sense of what I was doing and why. I was going to be in logistics and operations coordination, which sounds, I'll grant you, exactly like what my mother would later describe as a desk job. And in the narrow literal sense, she wasn't entirely wrong. A significant portion of my career did involve a desk. It involved spreadsheets and maps and encrypted communications and filing systems and cross-reference databases and enough paperwork to, as Marcus once put it, build a second fort out of. But a desk is just the place where the thinking happens. And the thinking in my field was the difference between an operation that succeeded and one that didn't. The first deployment happened when I was 22. I'm not going to give you a lot of geographic specifics because some of them are still not mine to give, and also because the geography isn't really the point. The point is that I was 22 years old, and I was in a place that was actively trying to become dangerous faster than we could manage it, and my job was to make sure the right people were in the right places with the right information at the right time. The night that changed everything, the night that would, more than a decade later, explain why a Black Hawk was about to destroy my mother's garden, happened during my 4th month overseas. We had a forward operating position that was supposed to be low exposure. It wasn't. I won't say more about why. What I'll say is that the situation evolved faster than the models predicted, which is the military way of saying that everything went sideways at once, and the margin for error closed to approximately 0 in about 8 minutes. There were wounded. There was chaos in the specific form that chaos takes when everyone is professionally trained not to show it. And there was a sergeant first class named Marcus Reed, who was conscious but not mobile, pinned under debris from a compromised structure, with an evacuation window that was shrinking. I was the one who saw him. I was the one who worked the problem, identified the structural point, coordinated the pull, managed the timing against the evacuation schedule that was ticking down in my earpiece while I was physically in the middle of something that did not resemble any desk or any spreadsheet. We got him out. We got everyone out. The window held by a margin I don't like to think about too carefully. Marcus told me afterward, in the clipped and slightly embarrassed way that large, capable men sometimes discuss the fact that someone saved their life, that he wouldn't have made it without me. I said I was doing my job. He said, "Yeah, well, I don't forget." He didn't. That would matter later. That would matter enormously. I came home from my first deployment to Millhaven for 2 weeks of leave, which was the longest I'd been back since enlisting. Caleb had gotten engaged. My mother had repainted the kitchen. The town had a new gas station on Route 7, and the diner on Main had changed ownership, but kept the same menu, and somewhere in that sameness I was supposed to find rest. I found something adjacent to rest. I found the relief of recognizable things, the comfort of my mother's cooking, the slightly uneasy peace of being somewhere that had stayed still while I had moved. But I also found, for the first time, the gap. It's hard to describe the gap to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's not that civilian life is lesser. It's not that the people in it are somehow incomplete or naive. It's that you have been operating at a particular frequency for an extended period of time, a frequency that involves constant alertness and high stakes and the kind of focus that becomes second nature, and then you come home and the frequency changes and your nervous system doesn't immediately get the memo. I sat at my mother's kitchen table and ate her cooking and answered questions about what it was like over there, giving the answers people can receive. It was hot, it was hard, the people I served with were remarkable, and not giving the answers that don't translate. My mother watched me the way she always watched me, looking for the version of her daughter she understood, making small adjustments for the version she was actually getting. "You seem tired," she said, the third evening. "I am tired," I agreed. "But good tired or bad tired?" I thought about it. "Both." She nodded slowly. That was the closest we got that trip to talking about what I had actually been doing. After that, we talked about Caleb's fiancée, and the kitchen paint, and the gas station on Route 7. My second deployment came 2 years later. By that point, I had moved up in responsibility in ways I won't detail, and my work had become more specialized in ways I definitely won't detail. What I can tell you is that the nature of what I was coordinating had expanded significantly, and that the desk, always the laptop, always the encrypted files and the databases and the communication chains, was doing more load-bearing work than ever. I also became better at the thing that would define my career more than anything else, the ability to sit inside information that I couldn't share with anyone outside of my clearance level, to carry it quietly, and to let people around me believe whatever they were going to believe about what I was doing. Invisibility isn't natural. You learn it. You practice it. After enough practice, it becomes a kind of professional discipline, almost a point of pride. The work that no one sees is still work. The fact that nobody knows what you're doing doesn't make it less real. My mother did not share this philosophy. I left active duty when I was 29. The reasons were multiple and partially mine to tell, and partially not. What I can say is that I transitioned into federal contract work that utilized the same skill set in a different context, and that the work continued to be classified at a level that met my answer to the question, "What do you do?" remained, for all practical purposes, logistics consulting. Which was true. It just left out approximately 90% of the relevant information. I moved back to Georgia, not to Millhaven, but to a city about an hour north, close enough to visit, but with enough distance to breathe. I set up a home office. I worked from a laptop most days, with occasional site visits that I described when asked as client meetings. I called my mother on Sundays. I visited for holidays and occasional weekends. And at every single one of those gatherings, without exception, the subject of my career arose. Not always directly. Sometimes it came in sideways, through comparisons or questions, or the particular silence my mother deployed when she disagreed with something but had decided not to say so outright, which was in some ways louder than anything she could have said. "Caleb's crew finished that commercial project on the Riverside development," she'd say, the kind of statement that carried its own implication without needing to spell it out. Or, "Carol's daughter got that promotion. She's managing the whole regional office now." Or, most directly, the thing she said at Christmas when I was 31, which I've thought about more times than I can count. "I just worry, Sarah. I worry you're spending your best years staring at a screen. You could do anything." That's what I've always said. You could do anything, and instead you're doing emails. I looked at my plate. "It's not emails, Mom." "Then what is it?" And there it was. The question I had been living inside for years. The question I could not answer. The question that, in the absence of an answer, got filled in by my family's imagination with whatever made the most sense to them, which was, apparently, emails. "It's complicated," I said. My mother made a sound that was not quite a sigh, but was in the same family. "It's always complicated with you, Sarah. It's been complicated for 10 years. Caleb, to his credit, didn't pile on. He just passed me the sweet potatoes. The family gathering that October was not supposed to be significant. It was a long weekend, the kind of loosely organized visit that happens when the calendar has a gap and someone suggests it, and inertia does the rest. Caleb and his wife were there. My Aunt Linda had driven up from Savannah. Carol was there, because Carol was always there, a fixture in my mother's life, so consistent that she had essentially become extended family by attrition. And there was a new variable. Carol's son-in-law, Ray, who worked in construction management, had recently been promoted to some kind of regional director position and was in that specific phase of professional success where every conversation eventually found its way back to his career. I had driven down on Friday evening. By Saturday lunch, the dynamic was already established. Ray was holding court. My mother was attentive in the way she was attentive to people whose success she could understand. Caleb and his wife were in their own comfortable orbit. Aunt Linda asked me twice what I was up to these days, and both times, when I said consulting, moved on quickly as though she had received all the information the topic could offer. I had my laptop with me, as I always did. Not because I was expecting anything. I had cleared the weekend, same as always, same as I told myself every family visit, but because you don't leave the laptop behind. That's just not how it works, and anyone who does what I do will tell you the same thing. Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at the outdoor table with a glass of iced tea and my laptop open, going through some routine background work, when Ray wandered over with a plate of food and the comfortable authority of someone who had decided he wanted an audience. "What are you working on?" he asked. "Just some project documentation," I said. He looked at my screen the way people look at a painting they don't particularly like. "What kind of project?" "Federal contract work." "Logistics." My mother called over from the garden, supplying the word she always supplied, in the tone she always used for it, which managed to make logistics sound like something a person chose to do instead of anything more interesting. Ray nodded slowly. "I did some government contract work a few years back," he said, "before I moved into private development. The paperwork is unbelievable. No offense." "None taken," I said. "I always say," he continued, settling into the chair across from me with the ease of a man who has a lot of things he always says, that government work is where you go when you want security, but you're not really chasing anything. You know? Nothing wrong with it. Just, there's a ceiling. I looked at my screen. "Sure," I said. "Caleb was saying you've been doing this for what, 10 years? About that. And it's fully remote? You just work from home?" "Mostly." He speared a piece of chicken with his fork. "I couldn't do it. I need to see the thing I'm building, you know? I need to be able to point at something at the end of the day and say, I did that. That's there because of me." He gestured toward my laptop. "With the computer stuff, it's just, it goes where? Into the cloud? Into some government server somewhere? And then what?" My mother had drifted closer. She had her gardening gloves on, which meant she was only half listening, which was her way of listening very carefully while maintaining plausible deniability. "That's why I always said Sarah should have gone into something she could see," she said, "not to Ray, not quite to me, but to the general air. Medicine, maybe. Or law. Something where you know what you've done at the end of the day." I said nothing. "She was always so smart," my mother continued, the way mothers continue when they've started a sentence they've been rehearsing for years. "Top of her class. Could have done anything. And she chose, well." A pause. "She's happy, I suppose. That's what matters." The way she said it made it sound like happiness was a consolation prize. I looked at my laptop screen. I looked at the encrypted status report open in one of my windows. I looked at the operational overview that represented, in aggregate, a coordination effort spanning multiple states and involving the kind of resource deployment that would have made Ray's regional director title look, in comparison, like middle school student council. I closed the laptop halfway and said, "I'm going to get some more iced tea." And then, because the universe has a very specific sense of timing, my phone vibrated. I have a particular way my phone vibrates when something has moved from background to immediate. It's a setting I configured myself, a pattern I know in my chest before I've consciously registered it. 2 long pulses, then 3 short. I felt it in my pocket and went still. I excused myself, walked inside, opened the laptop on the kitchen counter, and looked at the alert. There are moments in this kind of work where everything that came before becomes irrelevant, where the noise drops away, and you are simply inside the problem. This was one of those moments. The operational situation had shifted. A ground-level coordination need had emerged within a specific geographic radius. The radius included my current location. I want to be careful here about what I say and don't say. What I can tell you is that the nature of my work means that sometimes operational necessity intersects with personal geography in ways that cannot be predicted and cannot be neatly separated. On that Saturday afternoon, I was the closest qualified coordinator to a situation that needed a coordinator. My location had been flagged. A request had come through the appropriate channels, and there was a time-sensitive extraction to facilitate. I made 3 calls in 4 minutes. I confirmed the situation. I gave my address. I confirmed the landing clearance requirements. I looked out the kitchen window at my mother's backyard. The marigolds, the bird bath, the decorative stones, and I calculated, professionally, what was about to happen to all of it. Then I went outside. "I need everyone off the lawn," I said. The table went quiet. Ray had his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother looked up from the garden bed. "I need all the furniture moved to the porch. The ceramic pot, the chairs, that folding table. Everything off the grass, as far back against the house as you can get it." Caleb looked at me. "Sarah, now please." I was already moving the nearest chair. "I'll explain when I can. Right now I just need the yard clear." There is a moment, that specific moment that always happens in these situations, where the people around you are deciding whether to comply with something they don't understand or push back and demand an explanation, and I felt it stretch. Then Ray laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that isn't entirely unkind but is entirely dismissive. "Is this a work thing?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You need us off the lawn for a conference call?" My mother made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not mean, just baffled. The laugh of someone watching a person they love do something inexplicable. "Sarah, honey," she said. "What on earth, Mom?" I looked at her directly. "I am asking you to please move to the porch. I promise I will explain whatever I can afterward. But right now I need the yard clear, and I need it clear in the next few minutes." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she took off her gardening gloves. "Caleb," she said, "move the chairs." Caleb moved the chairs. Aunt Linda took the ceramic pot. Carol grabbed her folding table with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has learned not to ask too many questions at family events. Ray stood for a moment longer, looking at me with the particular expression of a man who is trying to decide whether to find this amusing or concerning, and then he moved too. I stood at the edge of the grass with my phone to my ear. The yard was clear. The sky was clear. The afternoon was bright and almost unreasonably peaceful for what was about to happen to it. My mother stood on the porch with her gardening gloves folded in her hands, watching me. "Sarah," she said one more time. Not a question. Just my name. The way she'd said my name my whole life, with that particular mixture of worry and bewilderment and love. "It's okay, Mom," I said. And then the air changed. You feel it before you hear it. That's the thing about a helicopter at distance. The sound travels predictably, but the pressure wave moves differently. There's a quality to the air that shifts, like the atmosphere is rearranging itself to acknowledge something large is incoming. If you've spent enough time around military aircraft, you know it in your body before you process it consciously. My mother didn't know it in her body. She knew it as something unfamiliar, and therefore alarming. The first sign was the kitchen window, which began to vibrate in its frame. A low, subtle trembling that wasn't wind. My mother turned toward it, confused. Then the neighbor's dog started. Then the dog 3 houses down. Then, in a wave that moved through the neighborhood like something contagious, every dog within audible range began sounding an alarm that was purely instinctual, the kind of noise animals make when they encounter something beyond the normal scale of their experience. "What is that?" Carol said. The sound arrived fully then. Not like a sound so much as a presence, a weight in the air that you felt in your sternum before your ears caught up to it. The trees at the back of the property began to move, not the gentle movement of wind, but a forceful lateral push, every branch snapping sideways simultaneously, like they'd received an order. Ray stood up from his chair. Caleb took a step forward toward the porch railing. My mother, who had spent 11 years looking at me with that particular expression of fond, loving, uncomprehending patience, looked up, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before. The shadow came first. It crossed the fence line and moved across the lawn in a single smooth motion, swallowing the grass, the bird bath, the place where the marigolds had been, the whole backyard, all of it, until the shadow was larger than the yard and still expanding. And in that shadow, descending with the controlled precision of something that has done this 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more, the Black Hawk dropped below the tree line. The rotor wash hit the grass, and everything flattened. A perfect circle, expanding outward. My mother's garden, her marigolds, her decorative stones, the bird bath wobbling on its base, bent entirely sideways, and the porch furniture they hadn't moved scraped backward against the house, and somewhere down the street a car alarm started. And the landing gear touched down, and the backyard stopped being a backyard. My mother's hand had found the porch railing. Both hands, actually. She was gripping it with a knuckles-white intensity of someone who has just discovered that the world contains things they did not previously know were in it. Carol had pressed herself against the exterior wall of the house. Ray, I noticed, had stopped looking like a man who had things he always said. Caleb was staring at me. The side door opened. They came across the lawn the way people trained for this come across lawns, with the economy of movement that looks almost casual until you register the speed underneath it. The awareness, the way each person's position relative to the others was not random but deliberate, a pattern. 4 of them, full tactical gear, moving from the aircraft to the point where I was standing like I was a fixed coordinate on a map, which, from their perspective, I was. They did not look at my family. They didn't look at Carol or Ray or Caleb, or my mother standing at the railing with both hands and pale knuckles. They looked at me. The lead officer stopped. He was a head taller than I was, which is to say he was very tall. He had the kind of face that doesn't waste expression on anything that isn't operationally relevant. "Ma'am," he said, "the situation is confirmed. We have a 40-minute window." "Walk me through the revised routing," I said. He did. I listened. I asked 2 questions. He answered both. I looked at my laptop, which I had brought outside with me and which was now open on the outdoor table, my mother's outdoor table, the one we'd eaten at for every summer of my childhood, running an operational map that bore approximately 0 resemblance to anything Ray had imagined when he asked whether my work went into the cloud somewhere. "Authorize the secondary corridor," I said. "Hold the primary for weather contingency. Confirm asset positioning before you move and flag me if the window shifts." "Confirmed," the officer said. "You have 40 minutes, I said. "Go." He went. They went. Back to the aircraft with the same economy of motion. A brief hold, communications exchanged that I was monitoring in my earpiece, and then the rotors began building again. I closed the laptop. I turned around, and I looked at my mother. She was still holding the railing. The color had not entirely returned to her face. Behind her, Carol had her phone out. I could see it, could see the little red recording light, and was filming the aircraft with a slightly trembling hand. Ray was standing very straight and very still. Aunt Linda had sat down in a porch chair and appeared to be processing. Caleb was looking at me with the expression of a man who is revising a very long-held assumption in real time, which is a strange expression to see on a face you've known your whole life. My mother said, "Sarah." I said, "Mom." She said, "What?" and then stopped. She tried again. "What do you?" and stopped again. She looked past me at the helicopter, at the tactical team, at the operational map visible on my laptop screen, and then back at me. "What do you do?" I said, "I coordinate things." She said, "What things?" I said, "Things like this." There was a silence between us then that had a different quality than all the silences before it. The previous silences had been full of her trying to understand something I couldn't explain, and me watching her reach conclusions I couldn't correct. This silence was fuller and emptier at the same time, like a room after the furniture's been moved. "How long?" she said finally. "Since I enlisted." She looked at me. "Your whole career." "My whole career." Another silence. "The emails," she said, and her voice had a quality I couldn't quite categorize. "The consulting." She made a gesture that encompassed my laptop and the aircraft and apparently the last decade. "All of it. All of it," I confirmed. She looked past me again at the Black Hawk. The rotors were at full speed now. The downwash was hitting the porch and moving her hair. She had to raise her voice slightly to be heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. And I said the only honest thing there was to say. I wasn't allowed to. The helicopter lifted. It rose above the fence line, above the tree line, banked slightly to the south and climbed, and within 60 seconds it was a sound, and within 90, it was nothing. My mother's backyard looked like a different yard. The marigolds were gone horizontal. The bird bath had tipped over, which I felt genuinely terrible about. The decorative stones were scattered. The grass in the landing circle was compressed in a perfect pattern that would take weeks to fully recover. Down the street, 3 neighbors were standing in their front yards looking south at the sky. Carol's video was 40 seconds of shaky gold that would, by the following morning, have 40,000 views on a platform I'm not going to name, captioned, "My friend's daughter is not a paper pusher," which is, and I say this with full appreciation, the most accurate 40-word summary of the situation anyone has ever produced. I stood at the edge of the dead circle in my mother's lawn and let the afternoon settle back around the yard. Then I went up the porch steps. Ray moved out of the way. I don't think he meant to do it consciously. His body just made a decision that his mind was still catching up to. I sat in the chair across from my mother. She was still holding the railing with one hand. She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I had to work to read, because it was an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. It wasn't the fond bewilderment. It wasn't the patient disappointment. It was something older and quieter and more complicated, the expression of a woman who has just discovered that a story she had been telling herself for a long time was missing a significant portion of its own plot. "I owe you an apology," she said. I said, "Mom, I do." She said it simply, not dramatically, in the way she said things when she had made up her mind. "I made assumptions. I decided what you were doing because you couldn't tell me what you were doing, and that wasn't fair." "You didn't have the information," I said. "I didn't ask the right questions," she said. "There's a difference." She paused. "I kept comparing you to people I could understand. Because I understood them, and I didn't understand you. And I should have," she stopped. "I should have trusted that you were you. You've always been you. I know who you are." We were quiet for a moment. Caleb said from somewhere behind me, "So when you say logistics consulting..." "Yes," I said. Yes. He was quiet for a second. "Okay," he said. And then, "Okay." Which was, from Caleb, the equivalent of a lengthy, emotional speech. The weeks after that Saturday were different. Not immediately, not all at once, but in the way that things change when a fundamental piece of information has been revised. My mother called that Sunday. Not our usual scheduled Sunday call, early before noon, which she never did. "I've been thinking," she said. "About the helicopter," I said. "About everything," she said. "About what I said at Christmas. About the email's comment." A pause. "I'm not good at apologizing, Sarah. You know that." "I know, but I'm sorry. For the emails thing specifically. And the ceiling comment, which wasn't me, but I laughed at it, and that was..." She stopped. "I should have been better." I said, "You didn't know." "I should have trusted that there was something to know," she said. "That's the part one keep coming back to. Even without knowing the details, I should have known my own daughter well enough to trust that she was doing something that mattered." I didn't say anything for a moment. "You were right about one thing," I said finally. "I do spend a lot of time staring at a screen." She made a sound that was, unexpectedly, a laugh. A genuine one. "Well," she said, "the screen apparently runs helicopters. So I suppose I can live with the screen." 3 months later, I was back in Millhaven for Caleb's daughter's birthday. My mother had replanted the marigolds. She had also replaced the bird bath, a newer and somewhat larger version that she had positioned in a slightly different spot, one that I noticed, without commenting, was outside the natural landing radius of the backyard. I sat at the outdoor table with my laptop because that's where I work and that's what I do. The table was the same table. The yard was recovered and green. The sky was clear. Caleb came and sat across from me with 2 beers and slid one toward me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Probably," I said. "The helicopter thing. Does that happen?" He paused, calibrating. "Is that a regular thing?" "Irregular," I said. "By definition." He nodded. "Right." He looked at his beer. When you were overseas. You never said much about it.
No.
Was it? He stopped. Started again. Were you okay? Over there? I looked at him. My brother, who had been fixing trucks since he was 17, who had never once seemed to want to be anywhere other than exactly where he was, who had called the military throwing my life away and had never entirely walked that back, who had just asked me the question it had taken him 12 years to ask. Yeah, I said. I was okay.
He nodded.
Good. He looked at the yard. The marigolds came back fast. They did. I agreed. Mom was worried they wouldn't. She didn't need to worry. He smiled a little. She never needs to worry about the things she worries about, he said. That's kind of her whole thing. I thought about my mother standing at the railing with both hands and pale knuckles, watching a black hawk descend into her garden, and the way her face had done something I'd never seen it do before. I thought about her calling early on Sunday. About the way she had said I should have trusted that you were you, which was the truest and most generous thing she had ever said to me, and which I had thought about more in 3 months than most things I had thought about in years. Yeah, I said. Her whole thing. I want to say something about invisibility, because I think it's the actual center of the story, and the helicopter is just the spectacular edge of it. There is a category of work in this world that is specifically designed to be invisible. Not secretive for the sake of secrecy, not hidden out of shame, but invisible because the visibility would compromise the work itself. The people who do this work learn to live inside the invisibility. They learn to carry the weight of what they know without being able to set it down in front of anyone who might help them carry it. They answer questions in incomplete sentences not because they are evasive but because the complete sentence is not theirs to give. They watch people form conclusions about them from partial information, and they cannot correct those conclusions, and so the conclusions stand. And sometimes, not always, not even usually, but sometimes, the invisibility breaks. Sometimes a situation arises, a convergence of necessity and geography and timing, and the thing that was hidden becomes briefly and dramatically and completely visible, and everyone who had been looking at the shadow gets to see what was casting it. I don't tell the story because I wanted to be vindicated. I don't tell it because I needed my mother to understand what I do before I could feel like my career mattered. My career mattered long before that Saturday. The work was real long before anyone watched it happen from a porch. I tell it because my mother said something to me that I think is worth saying out loud in whatever context it can reach. I should have trusted that you were you. That's it. That's the whole thing. Not that she should have known, because she couldn't have known. Not that she should have pretended to understand something she didn't understand. Just that she should have trusted the person she knew, the person she had raised, the person who left her kitchen table at 19 and came back changed in ways that couldn't be named but were still, underneath all of it, the same person she had always been. The work you can't see is still work. The people you can't fully understand are still people you know. The capacity to trust someone's character in the absence of complete information is, I would argue, one of the more important capabilities a person can develop. My mother is developing it. So, am I. About 6 weeks after the Saturday, I got a call from Marcus. He had heard, through the specific network by which these things travel among people who have worked together in high-stakes environments and stayed loosely connected ever since, about the October weekend. Someone on the coordination team had mentioned it, the way that unusual logistical situations eventually circulate as low-key legends, and the detail that it had been a family visit, a suburban backyard, a family event interrupted by an extraction team. That detail had made its way to Marcus. I heard about your mom's garden, he said. The marigolds are recovering, I said. A pause. Then he laughed. Marcus doesn't laugh easily or often, which makes it a specific and valuable sound. The marigolds, he said. Right. The bird bath didn't make it, I said. She replaced it. I want to hear the whole thing, he said. So I told him. The dinner. The family gathering. Ray, and his things he always says. My mother in her garden gloves. The request coming through, the alert on my phone, the calculation I made standing in the kitchen looking at the yard. Clearing the lawn furniture. The shadow. Marcus was quiet through most of it. At the end he said, she finally got it.
She got some of it, I said.
Enough. Sometimes enough is enough, he said. Yeah, I said.
Sometimes it is.
He asked how I was doing, I asked how he was doing, we talked for a while about other things, the way you do with people who share a particular history and have learned to speak around the parts that can't be spoken. Before he got off the phone, he said, "For what it's worth, I always knew you were running something real. Even back in the civilian days. Even when you were the laptop one at family dinners." He paused. "You had the same look. Same look you had when you were pulling me out of that building." Just pointed at a screen instead of a door. I didn't know what to say to that for a moment. "Same job," I said finally. "Different door." "Different door," he agreed. "Same result. The last time I was in Millhaven, I helped my mother replant the marigolds. We were outside for about 2 hours on a Sunday morning, not talking about anything in particular, mostly just working. She told me about the neighbor's new fence. I told her about a book I'd been reading. She asked whether I was sleeping enough, which is the question she asks when she means something else, and I said yes, which was mostly true. At some point, she sat back on her heels and looked at the yard and said, "It's going to be fine. Another season, and you won't know anything happened." I looked at the yard. The grass had grown back in the landing circle. The marigolds were in rows that were almost as symmetrical as the previous ones. The new birdbath caught the morning light. "Yeah," I said. "It'll be fine." She looked at me then. Not the look from before, not the fond bewilderment, not the patient disappointment. The other look. The one I'd seen for the first time when the shadow crossed the fence and she understood, in some wordless and irreversible way, that the story she had been telling about me was a smaller story than the actual one. "You're good at what you do," she said. 3 words with a period at the end of each one. No qualification. No comparison. No but, or however, or I just wish. I looked at the marigolds. "Yeah," I said. "I am." She nodded. Once, the way she nods when she has decided something. Then she went back to planting. And we worked in the yard together until the morning was gone, and the garden was back, and everything that had been flattened by the October sky had grown back into something that was, if you looked at it right, maybe even better than before. Asterisk if you made it to the end of this. Thank you. I've wanted to tell this story for a long time, in the version that I'm allowed to tell. If any part of it resonated with you, the invisible work, the family who couldn't see it, the moment when something finally becomes visible, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you know someone who does work that can't be explained over a dinner table, maybe just tell them you trust them. It costs nothing and it means more than you know.